From Los Angeles, I'm Eddie Garcia. He's Doug Stolhand. Thanks for joining us for another edition of the Puck Podcast. It is Sunday, May the 4th, 2025. This is the first period of a three-period podcast. The first period, which some of you are watching on YouTube, is going to recap the conclusion of the first round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs. Our second period is our interviewer special feature segment. This week, Doug and I are going to discuss the second round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs and also the latest news from around the NHL over the past week. And our third period is our fan feedback segment where we read listener emails. We have our off-ice report, tell you what's going on in our lives. You can find all three periods on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you're seeing on YouTube, please subscribe and get notified when our latest shows are out.
This here podcast is one of the longest running podcasts in the world, at least for English language. I don't know about other countries, but we've been going at this since 2006 and have not missed a single week since then. We're coming up on our 20th anniversary in just a couple months, and combined, Eddie and I have over 50 years of sports media experience, and we've been members of the NHL media for over 30 years. So a lot of experience doing this here show, but still we see things every week that we do not expect and have never seen before, and this week was no different. We cover all 32 teams equally. Of course, there's not all 32 teams still in action, but we will cover all series equally. And we start with the big news from the past week. And for that, I turn it over to my good friend, my co-host, and a man who is wearing an LA Dodgers hat, but it is not an LA Dodgers hat, even though it is the LA Dodgers logo, Eddie Garcia.
That is correct. It is not blue. It is black. And I consider this my LA hat. It's not my LA Dodgers hat. It is my LA hat. Anyway,
I saw a Fresno State hat that I know was not a Fresno State hat, but I considered it a Fresno State hat. And do you know which hat I'm talking about?
Florida State?
That's correct.
Okay.
Because it was just a black hat with the FS logo that both Fresno State and Florida State use. And when I see it, I immediately think of Fresno State, of course, but it was on an East Coast radio show. And I'm like, there's no way that person is wearing a Fresno State hat.
Probably not. Well, the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs are officially over. It was nice of them to schedule it for us. I'm sure that's exactly what they did. They knew we would be doing the show on Sunday night. And the final game was just concluded not long ago. And what a final game it was. But we are excited to talk about the completion of the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. We're going to go in the same order in which we did last week, which was the order in which the playoffs started. So we will begin with the Blues against the Jets. The top seed in the West, the President's Trophy winners, the Winnipeg Jets, hosting the 8th seed in the West, the number 2 wildcard team. When we last left you, the first 4 games have been played. The Jets won game 1 by a score of 5-2. They took the second game 2-1, so they had a 2-0 series lead. We go to St. Louis, game 3, big win for the Blues, 7-2. They take game 4 by a score of 5-2. And what was really noteworthy about games 3 and 4, Winnipeg goalie Connor Hellebuyck, the almost certain Vezina Trophy winner, maybe the Hart Trophy winner as well, was pulled in each of those 2 games. So the home team had won every game as we go into game number 5. Back in Winnipeg, and one note for the Jets, Gabe Vilardi, one of their top line forwards who'd been out for a while due to injury, back in the lineup for the first time in this series. So the Jets would get a victory in this one. They improved to 3-0 on home ice, win it 5-3. They scored 2 goals in the first period, 2 more in the second. Kyle Connor had a goal, his 4th, with 2 assists as well. Vladislav Nemestikov gets the game winner. In the loss, Nathan Walker, 2 goals for St. Louis, but the Jets again win it 5-3 and take a 3-2 lead in the series. And once again, the home team had won every game at this point. Connor Hellebuyck back on home ice, a little bit better. 3 goals allowed on 19 shots. Not a great save percentage. Jordan Bennington in the loss, 4 goals allowed on 25 shots. Big story, though, coming out of this game. Top line center for Winnipeg, Mark Scheifele, injured, took a big hit in the first period, didn't come out for the second or the third, and we would find out that he would not make the trip to St. Louis for game 6.
Yeah, that's the big one there was they did get Gabe Vilardi back, and they had their top line back in action for all of one period, not even one full period, as Mark Scheifele was out. So losing one of your best offensive players, had they not gotten Vilardi back, would have been even more devastating. But having him back in the lineup certainly lessens it a little bit, but that's a big loss for them going into game 6. But as you said, the home team winning every game so far, and a completely different Connor Hellebuck on home ice and on the road so far in this series, getting pulled in both road games, 3-0 on home ice, and now back to St. Louis, his house of horrors for game 6.
Oh, that's right. And another note for the Jets, roster-wise, Nikolai Ehlers returning to the lineup for game 6. But again, Mark Scheifele not even making the trip in this one. So as far as game 6, stop me if you've heard this before, the Blues scored 3 goals on Connor Hellebuck, and he would get pulled for the 3rd time in St. Louis, 3 goals in the second period. Braden Shen would end up scoring the game winner in this one for St. Louis. Nathan Walker, a guy that we've talked about off and on this show over the years. The born in England, raised though in Australia, hockey player is having a great playoffs. He scored a goal in this one, and St. Louis evens the series at 3 games apiece. Once again, the home teams won every game so far in the series, and we would be going back to Winnipeg for a deciding game number 7. 5-2 was the final score in this one, the Blues getting the win. Again, Connor Hellebuck pulled again. He allowed 5 goals on 23 shots. Eric Comrie came on in relief, didn't allow a goal on 4 shots. Jordan Bennington, 4 goals allowed on 25 shots. So again, Connor Hellebuck, Vezina Trophy winner, maybe wins the Hart Trophy. On home ice, 3-0, 2.33 goals against average, and .879 save percentage. But on the road, 0-3, pulled in each game. His goals against average, 7.24, and his save percentage, .758.
It's unbelievable how bad he's been on the road, and literally the worst goalie in the NHL or in the playoffs on the road this year. Even Charlie Lindgren, who only had 5 shots against him and allowed 1 goal, has a better save percentage at .800. So everybody that played has a better save percentage than Connor Hellebuck as a road goalie this year. And it's baffling because this is a guy that, as you said, is the runaway Vezina winner, probable or is a Hart Trophy finalist. We know that. He could be winning that. I don't think he will, but he could. But the best goalie in the league in the regular season, home or road, it didn't matter. He was not a home he wasn't leaning on his home stats all season long. He was great everywhere. But St. Louis, man, absolutely owned him in that building. And luckily for the Jets, the game 7 was not, if it was on the road, you could not play him. I think you would almost have to start Eric Comrie, which sounds crazy. But how do you put a guy back out there that has been that bad? That a 758 save percentage is ridiculous on 66 shots. It's not a small sample size. He allowed 16 goals on 66 shots. So, but for them, he's back on home ice. And there was a lot of talk about him being a problem for them going into game 7. And what do they do? I had confidence in him on home ice. I've seen him in this series. As you said, he wasn't lighting it up on home ice, but he played well, and they had won every game. So I was confident he would have a good outing in game 7. There was no doubt that you got to start him. He's your Vezina finalist and Vezina winner, but it was a legitimate question going into the final game of what Connor Hellebuck would show up and which Winnipeg Jets would show up, as the pressure was all on them, and the Blues were the unexpected 8 seed going into a game 7 against the President's Trophy winner.
And a winner take all game 7 back in Winnipeg.
First ever game 7
right,
in the city of Winnipeg.
That is correct. It was also the 200th game 7 in NHL playoff history. Still no Mark Scheifele. You thought, God, if there's any way he could play in a game 7, right? He's got to go. But he couldn't go. So that tells you how hurt he is, as you know, if they are able to advance, right? Well, that'll be a storyline. And during the game in the first period, they lose Josh Morrissey, one of their top defensemen. He gets hurt and couldn't return. And things were not looking good early on for the home team, as the Blues scored on the first shot of the game for them, Jordan Kyrou with the goal. And then the Blues scored on the 4th shot of the game for them, and it was 2-0. And you're already thinking, Are you considering pulling Connor Hellebuck? The crowd is completely taken out of the game. They're like,
Yep.
they're all thinking, oh my God, I can't believe this. Fortunately for Winnipeg, they did get the next goal, or else I'm sure they would have pulled him, but Cole
Well,
Perfetti
yeah.
scored on the power play to make it 2-1.
Yeah, I was going to say the first two goals. The first one was a rush up the ice for the Blues, and Colton Parayko had the puck. He could have shot it into an empty net, and for some reason, he passed it over to Jordan Kyrou, who tapped it into an open net. So Connor Hellebuck completely lost the thread on that one. And then the next one's a Matthew Joseph snapshot that beats him short side, clean short side. He's looking right at it. So very bad. And you could tell that if they gave up a third in that first period, he probably would have been pulled. But they made it. It's like a boxer hearing the bell at the end of a ring when he's on the ropes. Thank God, get a break, clear your head. It was a terrible first period for the Jets. Only 3 shots on net in the first period. Absolutely brutal start. And the Blues are up 2-0, but they made it to the bell. They get to intermission. They reset. And as you said, Cole Perfetti, after halfway through on the power play, when the refs finally blew a whistle, because they were letting a lot go in this game. They were like, we're not going to be the deciding factor. They call a penalty, and they immediately scored 7 seconds in to make it 2-1. Got the crowd back in it. But that would not last long.
Well, yeah, the next goal would come under a minute left in the second period. Radek Faksa scored with 35 seconds left. So now you're going into the third. You've just allowed a third goal, and you're down 3-1 in Game 7 going into the third period. It did not look good for the Winnipeg Jets. Fortunately for them, they needed to have the next goal for sure. They would get it. Vladislav Nemestikov scores to make it 3-2. But time is ticking away, and time is running out on the season for the President's Trophy winners. They pull the goalie down late, and with 3 seconds left, Cole Perfetti saves the day, at least for the moment, with a goal, his second of the game, to tie it, and we are going to overtime.
Both goals with the goalie pulled. They had they had to, right? Your season's on the line. You got nothing to lose. And Nemesnikov's goal was a beauty. Perfetti's both goals were deflections, and both goals were absolutely ridiculous. The first one was, I don't know that I've seen a goal like that. He's parked. He's standing off to the side of the goal. The power play, they set it up. They shoot it towards him well wide, and he deflects it high, short side on Jordan Binnington, who was in good position, but just beats him clean with a beautiful deflection for his first goal. This one, I couldn't believe the patience from Nikolai Ehlers. The crowd's going crazy. You know there's less than 10 seconds left. He whiffs on a shot from the point. Somehow Adam Lowry gets the puck in a battle back to Ehlers, who doesn't shoot, but decides to pass over to Kyle Connor, who then decides to not shoot and passes it, the shot pass to Cole Perfetti in front. Perfect deflection, tie game with less than 3 seconds to play. Place is going absolutely bananas. Incredible patience from the Jets in that situation. And once it went to overtime, obviously all the momentum's on Winnipeg's side, but anything can happen. One shift, as you were texting me, when we all know this from our teams in overtime, every zone entry, you're holding your breath. When the other team's in the offensive zone, you're holding your breath. When you're there, you're on the edge of your seat. It's pins and needles in overtime for fans.
Have your Ducks ever played an overtime Game 7?
I'm sure they have. I don't remember.
Well, there's certainly one I remember as a Kings fan. In Chicago, Western Conference Finals, they go overtime against the Blackhawks. And I've said it before on this show, it is the most stress I've ever felt watching a sporting event where my heart or my stomach was in my throat. My heart was pounding on every shot on both ways because it could end on any shot. And you go from you win, you go to the Stanley Cup final, you lose, the season's over. It's like the ultimate, I guess the Stanley Cup final would be the ultimate, but this, at the time it felt like that was the Stanley Cup final because we felt like LA and Chicago, they had each won the cup, in that span. Right. It felt like it was almost the Stanley Cup final. And I was just a basket case. Fortunately for me, it did come out with a happy ending, but Yeah, that way it's just the stress of that is just unbelievable if you're a fan of one of these teams. And we know personally a couple of people who are fans of both the Blues, our friend Jeff Ponder, and of course Hart in Lake Echo, Nova Scotia,
Right.
who's a big Winnipeg Jets fan.
No, it was like I said, and there was a penalty that the refs called, and they weren't calling anything, but they had to call this one because Braden Shen shot the puck out of the rink into the stands, didn't hit the glass, didn't hit a defenseman. So that's a delay of game penalty. It's an automatic. The refs can't ignore that one. They can ignore every other physical foul, and they did. I saw flat elbows into faces, boarding penalties. They ain't calling dung. I mean, they didn't even bring the whistle with them. So they just had good tickets. But they called that penalty, and I thought, and they ended up killing it, the Blues did. But I thought if they score on that penalty, you wonder if Luke Shen goes over and consoles his brother coming out of the penalty box of just hey, man, I feel for you, because that's a terrible place to be. You're already nervous, but imagine how helpless you are in the penalty box, watching your team kill a penalty for you in overtime of Game 7.
Well, judging by their trash talking each other in Game 6, perhaps not at that point.
Yeah.
Maybe sometime in the offseason.
And to his credit, we mentioned Connor Hellebuck. He got better as the game went on. He survived that early onslaught. Second period, he was better. He was great in the third period and overtime. He was getting stronger, reading the puck and reacting like the guy we've seen all year.
It was the 50th Game 7 overtime in NHL Stanley Cup playoff history. But we would end up having another a double overtime. There was no scoring in the first overtime. We go second overtime. It was the third longest Game 7 in NHL history before it would finally end in the second overtime. Neil Pionk for the Jets with the shot. He played over 40 minutes, by the way, did Neil Pionk in this game.
Yeah, they only had 5 defensemen. As you mentioned, Morrissey out immediately.
Yep.
And he played 46 minutes of ice time as a defenseman, and then has the primary assist. Crazy.
Adam Lowry, the captain, with a deflection in front. And the Jets, the explosion of emotions in Winnipeg, the greatest win, I got to think, in Jets history, as they win at 4-3 to survive and advance. Jordan Bennington allowed 4 goals on 47 shots. Connor Hellebuck allowed 3 goals on 29 shots. Third time in Jets franchise history that they have advanced into round number 2, but it's certainly a game that will be long remembered for the Winnipeg Jets. Obviously tough for the St. Louis Blues, but all the pressure in the world was on the Jets and Connor Hellebuck and no Mark Scheifele, and they lose Josh Morrissey. It's a pretty impressive win for the Winnipeg Jets.
It's absolutely unbelievable. And we're going to talk about another Game 7 that's in very similar circumstances, without one of your top forwards, without one of your top defensemen. And this was, though, when you're down 3-1, I'm not saying this to troll you, Eddie. I would say it if it was any other team. The Blues pulled the Kings on this one. They had a 3-1 lead late, and they stopped playing. They had 4 shots in the third period, 4 shots in overtime. They tried to win 3-1. They thought, we have 3 going into the third. That's enough. They stopped playing their game. How teams do this consistently is beyond me, because we saw this not work for the Kings earlier in the week. It didn't work here. You cannot go in a shell for 20 minutes against a desperate, good hockey team in the playoffs. And look, it was 2 miracle goals, really, especially that second one with less than 3 seconds left. But you've got to keep on the attack and make some pressure in the defensive zone. It was too many chances for the Jets, for St. Louis. And I don't understand. Total, they had 29 shots, and 16 of them were in the first 2 periods. So 13 shots after the first 2 periods in basically 4 periods of hockey. That's not, you got to play your game. And St. Louis, I know it was house money there, but you had a perfect chance. And for Winnipeg, the catharsis has to be so deep for them to exercise those demons. As you said, all the pressure. A first-round exit as a President's Trophy winner with your goalie getting pulled in 3 road games would be devastating. Now, that's all forgotten. The pressure, the steam that built up was relieved, And now they can, I think, relax and play their game, because playing Dallas, that's another great team. You're not the heavy favorite like you were in this one. You've proven you can win a big game. You've proven you can get over that hump. Now they can relax in the second period, I hope. But this would have been devastating if they lost. And I felt good for Winnipeg that they came back and won. I feel terrible for the Blues because they had it in their hands with a 3-1 lead with less than 2 minutes to play, and they don't advance.
We'll talk obviously about the second round matchups coming up in the second period. We move on to a great matchup that we were anticipating for a while. Avalanche versus Stars, 2 versus 3 matchup in the Central. Didn't look like going into the playoffs it might be as great of a matchup as we had thought, because the Stars are playing so poorly down the stretch, and they didn't have 2 of their best players in Miro Heiskanen and Jason Robertson. But when we last left you, the first 4 games have been played, and it was even at 2-2. The first game went to Colorado on the road, 5-1. Colin Blackwell gets an overtime game winner for Dallas in game 2 for a 4-3 win to even it up at 1-1. We go to Denver, overtime for the Stars to get a 2-1 win thanks to Tyler Sagan's overtime goal. So 2 straight OT wins for Dallas. And then game 4, we had Gabriel Landeskog getting the big goal. Mackenzie Blackwood, 23 save shutout, 4-0. Colorado with the win. So again, going into game 5, we are all even at 2-2. It's a best of 3.
And yet, I think total in this first 4 games, I think total the Avalanche had been trailing for like 66 seconds, and they found themselves tied. I mean, it was just, as you mentioned, 2 overtime game winners for Dallas, a dominant pair of wins for Colorado. So collectively, you look at the first 4 games, you say Colorado is severely outplaying Dallas, and yet the series is 2-2 going into game 5.
Well, game 5 back in Dallas was all the home team. Wyatt Johnston scored 9 seconds into the game, the fastest playoff goal in history. He'd finished with 2 goals. Mikko Rantanen had a goal and 3 assists as the Stars cruised to a 6-2 win to take a 3-2 lead in the series. In the loss, Nathan MacKinnon did score his 5th goal of the playoffs. Jake Ottinger allowed 2 goals on 28 shots in the win. Mackenzie Blackwood allowed 5 goals on 18 shots before getting pulled. Scott Wedgwood did not allow a goal on 8 shots that he faced. So the home team gets the win, and now we're headed back to Denver for a game 6. This one was a pretty wild one. Colorado jumped out to a 2-0 lead. Dallas would then score 4 goals in the second period to Colorado's 1. And then in the third, the Avs would score 2 goals. They would take a 5-4 lead. They would ice it with a couple of empty netters and skate off with a 7-4 win for Colorado. Valeri Nichushkin had 2 goals. Cale Makar gets his first of the series, 2 assists. And Nathan MacKinnon, his 6th of the playoffs, a bizarre game-winning goal for him as he was the last to touch the puck. And then Sam Steele of the Stars tried to clear it in front. It went off the body of teammate Colin Blackwell and deflected into the net. That was the game winner. And again, MacKinnon gets credited for it. For Dallas, Mikko Rantanen had a 4-point period in the second period, and Rope Hentz had 4 points as well with 2 goals and 2 assists. But in a losing effort, Mackenzie Blackwood allowing 4 goals on 26 shots in the win. Jake Ottinger, 5 goals on 46 shots in the loss. And that would set up a deciding game 7 back in Dallas.
And again, going into game 7, Colorado kind of felt like they escaped this one with, as you mentioned, the wild second period. They're losing going into the third. They come back and win. They get a crazy bounce on that MacKinnon goal. Absolutely baffling how that sequence of events took place, but they found a way to win. And then they go into game 7, and you figure they've got the healthier team. They don't have Heiskanen. They don't have Robertson. Can they win this game 7 on home ice? And it didn't look like it for a while. I'll say that.
Well, an old broadcaster named Dick Stockton once famously said, "Stats tell you what has happened, not what will happen. However, going into game 7, a lot of history was on the side of the Dallas Stars and not much on the side of the Colorado Avalanche." We'll give you the details on that in a minute. There was some thought that perhaps Miro Heiskanen or Jason Robertson might be able to draw in for a game 7. They are both skating. They're both now day to day. So we think they're looking to come back relatively soon if, of course, the Stars could survive the game 7, but they would not play in this winner take all Game 7. And a good start for the road team in this one as the Avalanche had a 2-0 lead. Nathan MacKinnon scoring his 7th of the playoffs just 31 seconds into the third period. But as we just talked about in a previous game, the home team would storm back. Mikko Rantanen scores 2 goals to tie it. Then there was a holding penalty on Jack Drury of Colorado, gave the Stars a power play late. Wyatt Johnston scores the go-ahead goal on the power play, and then Mikko Rantanen would ice it with an empty net goal for his first career playoff hat trick and his second consecutive 4-point period. And the Stars would stun the Avalanche with a 4-3 victory. Jay Gottinger, 3 goals allowed on 18 shots in the win. Mackenzie Blackwood, 2 goals allowed on 27 shots in the loss. But, it looked like the Avs had this one pretty much in control, and then Mikko Rantanen absolutely took over against his old team. 2 great goals. These were not with the goal he pulled. These were even straight goals. Then they get the power play and are able to get the win. But, man, Game 7s for both of these teams. It's been great for Dallas, not so great for Colorado. I will say, I guess, great for head coach Pete DeBoer, who's the Dallas head coach. He's 9-0 now in his NHL coaching career in Game 7, 3-0 as head coach of the Stars. Those 9 wins in Game 7 are more than any other coach or manager in any North American sport, NHL, NBA, Major League Baseball. But Mikko Rantanen is obviously the story here. First player in NHL history with a third period Game 7 hat trick. First player in NHL history with back-to-back 4-point periods. He took over the postseason points lead in the process from Nathan MacKinnon and Connor McDavid. For Colorado, they've now lost 7 straight Game 7s. And the Stars became the 4th team in NHL history to rally down 2 or more goals in the third period to win a Game 7. And then, by the way, the Winnipeg Jets, we just talked about it, did it the next night.
Yeah.
To become the 5th team in NHL history to do it. So needless to say, an amazing 2 games in 2 days, both Game 7s to wrap up the end of the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Yeah, I think they mentioned it on tonight's TNT broadcast here in the States that the Stanley Cup playoffs have been going around for 106 years. And there had been 3 multi-goal comebacks in the third period of a Game 7 up to this point, and now it's on back-to-back nights. So absolutely spectacular stuff. Mikko Rantanen, you mentioned it. He had 8 points in those 2 periods combined. He had 6 points total in his tenure with the Carolina Hurricanes. So he had more points in those 2 periods than he did in the 16 games, the 13 games he played for the Carolina Hurricanes. So we'll talk about some other players that have made a difference as trade deadline acquisitions. But what an acquisition for the Dallas Stars. They didn't know Jason Robertson would be injured in the first round. They didn't know Miro Heiskanen would be injured. And they certainly didn't know for a fact they were going to play the Colorado Avalanche. But getting him saved their season. He has the biggest period of his life when they need it the most. As you mentioned, a hat trick. And I loved seeing some of the people throwing the hats before it even scored as soon as he got into the open ice for that, because they recognized the greatness that they were witnessing and the celebration was on. And against his old team, the handshake line, you could see the love that he had for his former teammates. He had some harsh words for him in the moment because he got traded from that team and he didn't want to leave. But man almighty, we talked about the catharsis for Winnipeg. That had to be cathartic for Mikko Rantanen. And what had to be a trying season, getting traded twice, now has the long-term contract extension, helps his team advance. And both teams on home ice with comeback victories late in the third period to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Devastating losses for the Avalanche and Blues. Both teams had it there, thought they were going to win, did not. And you gotta give full marks to Dallas in this one to take on a 7-game series. They were playing like absolute ass at the end of the season, looked terrible, flipped a switch in this series and somehow found a way to beat a very good Avalanche team despite not having Robertson, despite not having Heiskanen. They're playing guys like Thomas Harley, who's a young defenseman, very good. He played over 27 minutes in this game. He stepped up big time in this series. They're getting big moments from Essa Lindell, who's playing a bigger role than he's normally going to have to play. Cody Cece playing a much bigger role. But they rolled all 4 lines. If you look at their ice time, only Colin Blackwell was under 10 minutes in this game. And that shows you that they're playing a balanced lineup, whereas the Avalanche leaning a little bit more on their top 3 lines. Joel Kiviranta, less than 7 minutes. Jonathan Drouin, less than 8 minutes. Charlie Coyle, less than 10 minutes. That kind of stuff wears on you over the course of a series, and fresh legs skate better, especially in the third period. Man almighty, what a Game 7 both of these were. And when you watched on Saturday night, you did not think it was going to get topped the next night, but it was. But what a moment for Dallas.
No doubt. Incredibly impressive performance by that team. And for Mikko Rantanen, he may still love his old teammates, but probably didn't love the Colorado Avalanche organization. He got a chance to stick it to him.
Yeah.
And he definitely did. And if you're the Avalanche, this is an epic fail. I know they didn't trade him to Dallas, but you decided with a team that you're trying to win the Stanley Cup with, that it was more important that you got something in return for Mikko Rantanen than to keep him and be as strong as you possibly could and try to win the Stanley Cup this year. And I know it was a very difficult matchup for them in the first round. There's no shame in losing to obviously a very good Dallas Stars team, even if, they were struggling going into the playoffs. But that trade now has come back to bite them. And it ends up, he's not only not on your team anymore, now he's playing for the division rival that eliminates you in the playoffs. So that obviously is a incredibly bitter pill for everyone with the Avalanche to have to swallow.
I wouldn't say epic fail for them, only in the sense that we talk all the time about you can't let an asset leave for nothing. And if they knew they weren't going to be able to re-sign him, then you have to trade him at the deadline. We talked about this with John Tavares back in the day when he was on the Islanders, and they decided to keep him for their playoff run. And then he walks for nothing. And we dragged that organization for that decision.
Well,
so
but
trading him to the Eastern Conference.
The caveat is with that is that if you're a close team to winning a cup, then you have to decide whether it's in your best interest now to try and win it with an elite player rather than worry about what's going to happen down the road. That was the dilemma they had. They decided to think more of the future than the now, and it has hurt them in the now.
I think this keeps the cup window open longer than if they had just gone for it this year. And I think the decision to trade him to the East was the right decision. They could not have predicted he would not re-sign with Carolina, and they would then trade him to their division rival before the deadline. That was that you couldn't have foreseen that. So I think they made the right decision, and they will be back in strong contention again next year. But there's no doubt this absolutely was a boomerang grenade for them that they thought, thank goodness we've gotten this situation handled, and we got Marty Necas, who was great for us, and we made moves to shore ourselves up. None of those moves worked. We talked about the moves that Dallas made, and it worked out for him to get a star player to re-sign him. That worked great. But you went and got players specifically to help down the middle. Charlie Coyle did not work. Brock Nelson did not work. And those guys are going to leave. Now you've got some moves to make, but I can't blame them for the decision they made at the time. But you have to, you can't help but look at the third period and Mikko Rantanen single-handedly coming back and beating you and sending you home as being incredibly poetic for, unfortunately, for the Avalanche.
All right, so 2 amazing series to lead things off. The rest of them aren't going to be as good, to be honest with you, as a recap.
No, those were the only Game 7s.
Those are the only Game 7s. We're happy, though, we had a couple of them.
They were fantastic.
They were absolutely amazing.
And the NHL, I know they couldn't plan this out, but the fact that it was on the weekend, 1 per day, was perfect. Everybody could watch Game 7 on Saturday. Everybody could watch Game 7 on Sunday. Perfection.
Let's move over to the Devils Hurricanes series, the 2-3 matchup out of the Metropolitan Division. When we last left you, the first 4 games of the series had been played. In Game 1, a 4-1 victory for the Carolina Hurricanes as Logan Stankoven, the man who was traded for Mikko Rantanen, had a couple of goals in the win. Game 2, Jordan Martinook, shorthanded goal, and Frederik Andersen, 25 saves to lead the Hurricanes to a 3-1 win to grab a 2-0 series advantage. Game number 3 in New Jersey saw the Devils get a much-needed victory on home ice, 3-2 in double overtime to make the series 2-1. But in Game 4, Andrei Svechnikov a hat trick. Canes go on for a 5-2 victory. Of note for Carolina, Frederik Andersen leaving with an injury. Their goaltender, Pyotr Kochetkov, finishing the game, and he would be in net as we go forward now into game number 5. That Game 5 was in Raleigh, North Carolina, a must-win for New Jersey. They jumped out to a 3-0 lead, but Carolina responded in the second with 3 goals of their own. We were tied 3-3. Each team would trade goals, and we would be tied at 4 after 2 periods. In the third period, we had no goals, so we go into an overtime. No goals scored. A second overtime. Dawson Mercer of New Jersey called for a double minor high-sticking penalty, and Sebastian Aho would take advantage with a power play goal. Carolina gets the 5-4 double overtime win, takes the series 4-1, and at the time, they were the first team to advance into the second round. For Aho, a goal and 2 assists, or excuse me, 2 goals and an assist in that Game 5 victory. Pyotr Kochetkov, 4 goals allowed on 35 shots in the win. Jacob Markstrom, 5 goals allowed on 54 shots in the loss. Devils were outshot 14-3 in the first overtime, 5-1 in the second overtime before Aho ended it. For Carolina, they have now advanced out of the first round for 8 straight seasons.
I mean, that's amazing. Rod Brindamore has never lost in the first round, to my knowledge.
That's correct.
Coach.
That is correct.
So the confidence, when you think about players and confidence, it's builds upon itself. You know, we talk about people that come through in big games, and you get that confidence once you've done it that you can do it again because you can draw on that. And the reverse is true. If you've come up short in big games, you have that doubt. I think the same is obviously true for coaches. Pete DeBoer has to go into a Game 7. He's never tasted loss in Game 7. So he's going in very comfortable and with his routine and in belief in what he is doing is right. And Rod Brindamore in the first round has to be the same way. But as you mentioned, the overtime was completely dominated. It's amazing this went to a second overtime. Jacob Markstrom deserved better. He was outstanding in net for New Jersey in this one. As you said, 19-4 were the shots in the 2 overtime periods combined in favor of the Carolina Hurricanes. And when you get a power play, especially a double minor power play, my goodness, just deflating. And that was the series ender. So good news for Carolina is they advance and they give Frederik Andersen some time to heal, some time to get better if for the second round. I wouldn't worry too much about rust for him, but this was a one that coming into the playoffs, I didn't expect to be a long series. It was the Devils put up as good a fight as they could have, I think, under the circumstances, shorthanded without their star players, but their star player with Jack Hughes. But ultimately, Carolina advances. They were the favorite to win this series. They were the better team in the regular season, and they advanced fairly quickly in 5 games, though it was 2 double overtime games.
That takes us to our next series, and that would be the Senators against the Maple Leafs. When we last left you, the first 4 games of the series had been played. Toronto gets the victory in Game 1, 6-2, 3 power play goals en route to the Game 1 win. Game 2 was a lot closer, but the result was the same. Max Domi with the overtime game winner and a 3-2 victory for the Leafs, who grabbed a 2-0 series advantage. Game number 3, Ottawa would strike back. Simon Benoit with an overtime game winner, 3-2. Senators get the win. Or excuse me, I apologize.
Yes.
That was the Maple Leafs. Simon Benoit with the overtime, 3-2 for Toronto, and in Ottawa. 3-0 series lead. 3-0 series lead for the Leafs at that point. So Game 4 was a must-win for the Senators, and they would get it. Another overtime game, this time defenseman Jake Sanderson scoring for the 4-3 win for the Sens, so they would avoid elimination and force a Game 5 back in Toronto. That brings us to where we start our review of this series. So Game 5 in Toronto, scoreless in the first period. Second period,
Tomas Shabbat gets on the board with a very nice little shot. Getting the pressure we talked going into the week was on. We thought on Toronto in this game because you didn't want to extend this series and put doubt in your mind. And Ottawa getting that first goal was big.
They would get the rest of the goals as well. Dylan Cousins scores shorthanded, and then 2 empty net goals to seal the scoring. 4-0 in Toronto. Senators get the win to keep their season alive and force a Game 6 back on home ice. Linus Ullmark, 29 saves in the shutout. Anthony Stolarz allowed 2 goals on 17 shots in the loss. And the Leafs fell to 1-13 in closeout games in the Matthews, Marner, whatever, core 4 era.
Yeah, and when you had 2 of your wins were overtime wins, this has been a much more competitive series than the 3-0 series lead that Toronto had. They were up 3-0, but 2 of them were overtime wins. Then you come back with back-to-back losses. One of them was in overtime, but we talked about it. A lot of pressure now on Toronto to avoid a potential Game 7 on home ice where Ottawa would have all the momentum. And Linus Ullmark looked like he was waking up and playing some great hockey the last 2 games.
So Game 6 in Ottawa, Toronto would open up the scoring with a power play goal, led 1-0 after one period. Second period, they made it 2-0 before the Senators would get on the board. It was 2-1 after 2. Third period, Ottawa tied it up, but Max Pacioretty would score to make it 3-2. William Nylander gets his second goal of the game into an empty net, and that would seal the Leafs 4-2 victory as they wrap up the series, winning it 4-2. Anthony Stolarz in the win allowed 2 goals on 23 shots. Linus Ullmark, 3 goals allowed on 22 shots. Toronto 5-0 now all time in the playoffs against their provincial rivals, the Ottawa Senators.
And big nights from their big players. You mentioned Max Pacioretty with the game winner, but Austin Matthews started the scoring with a power play goal. William Nylander had 2 goals and 3 points on the night. Mitch Marner had an assist. Morgan Riley did not have a point, but played almost 20 minutes. And Anthony Stolarz coming up with the big saves when they needed it. So their best players came through for them when they needed them. And Ottawa coming up just short. When they tied it up, I thought the momentum was on their side, obviously on home ice, potentially taking this to a Game 7, but not to be. Heartbreak again for the Senators and for the Maple Leafs. Relief and on to the second round.
And for Max Pacioretty, that's a guy that was added to the team on a player tryout in the preseason. So, and he missed a lot of this season with injuries as well. So
yeah,
a nice moment for a veteran guy who's,
I think that was his first playoff goal since 2021. So you got to feel good for him in that moment to have it, and not just a goal, an impactful series clinching goal to advance an original 16. Good for him.
And Anthony Stolarz had never started a playoff game before this postseason. Thought he was, and again, it's Ottawa. I understand he'll have a much bigger test going forward, but thought he was pretty solid in the series for Toronto.
If there's anything worth learning in these playoffs, it's that I don't know that experience in net is that vital as much as being hot and being comfortable. It's the good goalie right now is what is most important, and that's impossible to predict. You look at the pedigree and you say these goalies should play well. These should outplay the other goalie. It's not been the case in a lot of these series so far.
Toronto is in the second round of the playoffs for just the second time in the last 20 seasons. All right, we go back to the West now and check out the Wild against the Golden Knights. That's the 2 versus 7 matchup in the West. Vegas, the Pacific Division champs, against Minnesota, the number 1 wildcard team. When we last left you, the first 4 games of the series had been played. Vegas wins the opening game 4-2. Brett Howden with a couple of goals. Kirill Kaprizov scored 2 goals in game 2 to help the Wild get a 5-2 victory and even up that series at 1 game apiece. In the third game, it was the Wild scoring a 5-2 win to take a 2-1 lead in the series. But in game 4, Vegas bounces back with an overtime win. Ivan Barbashev with the game winner in sudden death. 4-3 Vegas wins to even the series, heading back home for game number 5. In game 5, Vegas would score the first goal of the game shorthanded, but Minnesota would bounce back to get the next goal. And Vegas then would score to reclaim the lead 2-1 after 1. Golden Knights with the lead. No goals in the second period. In the third, Matt Boldy would tie it up. We'd go overtime. And in sudden death, Brett Howden, 4th line center for Vegas, gets his 3rd goal of the series and gets the overtime game winner as Vegas wins the game 3-2 and now leads 3-2 in the series. Aiden Hill, 2 goals allowed on 22 shots in the win. Philip Gustafson allowed 2 goals on 25 shots before leaving with an illness. Marc-Andre Fleury was pressed into action and allowed the overtime game winner 1 goal on 7 shots to take the loss.
Yeah, it's a brutal loss for Minnesota because they had the opportunity there to win this or take a series lead. and just unable to do so. Now, granted, it was on the road, but still a great opportunity there. And to this point, if you had tell you before the series starts, Jack Eichel's going to have no goals through the first 5 games, and Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Boldy are going to be red hot through the first 5 games. You would think Minnesota would have the advantage. And yet, despite keeping Jack Eichel at bay, as you mentioned, Brett Howden stepping up and having a best series of his life. So big moments from the depth players for Vegas to give them that series lead.
Game 6 back in Minnesota, must win for the Wild. Vegas, though, would open up the scoring with a power play goal. Minnesota, though, would tie it up at 1-1. Second period, Vegas makes it 2-1 with the only goal of the period. In the third, Mark Stone scores to make it 3-1 Vegas. Minnesota would cut it to 1 goal, but could get no closer. Vegas holds on for the 3-2 win to win the series 4-2. Aiden Hill, 2 goals on 31 shots in the win. Philip Gustafsson, 3 goals allowed on 24 shots in the loss. Minnesota has now lost in the first round of the playoffs 8 straight times. And that was the final game for goalie Marc-Andre Fleury after a 21-year career for Vegas. 5th time in 8 years of existence that they have advanced in the postseason.
Well, you got to feel good for Vegas, right?
Yeah.
Tough team that's really suffered through some tough times over the years. This is an interesting series because it's the exact opposite of some of the series we'll talk about in addition this week. But the Wild have 2-star players that had great series in Boldy and Kaprizov. They each had 9 points, I believe, or Kaprizov had 9 points. Boldy had 7. They each had 5 goals. So that's a team that's driven by 2-star players that had great series. Vegas, on the other hand, is a collective unit that doesn't rely on 1-star player. Nobody had more than 3 goals. Tomas Hertl and Brett Howden led the team. Nobody had more than 5 points. Tomas Hertl and Jack Eichel both with 5 points, and yet they get the series done. So what is the better approach? Because it's the exact opposite in some of the other series we've seen where star players drive the wagon, and you think you need those players as opposed to a team effort. But this one, it worked out for Vegas. Ivan Barbashev was very quiet in this series. He had a much better regular season. And the challenge will certainly get stronger for Vegas as we go on here. But advancing once again, that the pedigree is with this team in that locker room, that they just believe they're going to win. And they prove it once again that they were able to do so. And Minnesota, as you mentioned, with 8 straight first-round losses, that doubt has to be in that locker room. All those players have been a part of that in some form, or at least most of them. The doubt of, can we even do this, has to be there because nobody in Minnesota has won a playoff series with Minnesota. And that's tough to get over that hurdle sometimes.
All right, let's keep it in the West. The Oilers taking on the Kings, 2 versus 3 matchup out of the Pacific. When we last left you, the first 4 games of the series have been played. Kings took game 1 in a wild one, 6-5. Philip Deneau getting the game winner with 42 seconds left as Connor McDavid had a 4-point game on a losing effort. Game 2, Kings cruise to a 6-2 win, lead the series 2-0. Adrian Kempe, a 4-point game, 2 goals, 2 assists for LA. Game 3 in Edmonton, the Oilers score 2 goals in 10 seconds after a bad coach's challenge and then a power play goal. Oilers had a couple of empty net goals, win at 7-4. And then game 4, Kings led 3-1 in the third. Evan Bouchard scored with 29 seconds left with the goal he pulled, ties it up. And then Leon Draisaitl gets the game winner in overtime. Oilers win at 4-2. Series even at 2-2 as we go into game 5. Game 5 back in Los Angeles after a scoreless opening period. Kings get the first goal on the power play, but the Oilers would tie it up. We were tied at 1 after 2 periods. In the third, Oilers would score and then add an empty net goal and win it 3-1, take a 3-2 series lead. First win for the road team in the series. Calvin Pickard in net allowed 1 goal on 22 shots. Darcy Kemper, 2 goals on 45 shots in the loss.
I mean, just listen to those numbers. 22 shots to 45. Staggering for how good the Kings had been on home ice, and a dominant performance from the Oilers, who found a way to take control of this game from the beginning, outshot the Kings 19-4 in the first period, had them on their heels the entire night. And despite the Kings getting that early lead, answered right back pretty quickly with a goal of their own to tie it. And Calvin Pickard, who relieved Stuart Skinner in this series, now 3-0. Surprising. This one was shocking, in my opinion, going in on paper. None of this makes sense, but you can't argue with the results when you see the game like that.
Yeah, really, really disappointing for me to see a team that had been historically good on home ice this year and the best home ice team in the NHL to get thoroughly outplayed by the Oilers. And of course, me watching the game, I'm thinking, I'm looking at this from a Kings perspective. I was in the press box doing some stuff as the press box had filed out. Everyone's going to the post game press conferences. I'm still there. The Edmonton radio guys are wrapping up their post game show, and I'm hearing them because we're the only ones there. And they said it was the best game of the season for the Oilers. And I thought, wow, I wouldn't have thought that because I'm focusing on the Kings as a Kings fan. But certainly a very impressive performance for them, and not a very good performance for the Kings. But Game 6 would be in Edmonton, a chance to close it out for the Oilers. Kings looking to win and force a Game 7 back on home ice. Wide open first period. The Kings would score twice, but the Oilers scored 3 times. A 3-2 Edmonton lead after 1. Oilers scored 2 goals in the second to LA's 1. Oilers led 5-3 after 2. Kings cut it to 5-4 in the final minutes, but Edmonton ices it with an empty net goal and gets the 6-4 win and wins the series 4-2. Calvin Pickard in the win, 4 goals allowed on 27 shots. Darcy Kemper in the loss, 5 goals allowed on 28 shots. 4th straight year, the Oilers have eliminated the Kings, and the Kings have still not advanced out of the first round of the playoffs since winning the Cup in 2014. It will be Oilers versus Golden Knights in round number 2.
Well, you mentioned some things about the Kings being historically good on home ice, and they certainly were this year. And the other thing that you can point to is when they scored first this year, they were the best team in the league. And they scored first in Game 5, and they scored first in Game 6, and they lost both games. They had leads on the road, 2-goal leads in the third period in Game 3 and Game 4. They lose both games.
I think it was a 1-goal. I think it was a 1-goal lead in Game 3, but yes, it was.
Yes,
2-goal lead in Game 4. Yes.
Yeah, and just so it's devastating. And you had a 2-0 series lead, and then you lose 4 straight to Calvin Pickard, the backup goalie. So again, you put it down on paper. No Matthias Ekholm for the whole series, and we're going to chase Stuart Skinner, and they're going to have to go to Calvin Pickard after the second game. And it still wasn't enough. And you wonder at what point, what do you have to do with this? Where do you go from here? It's a lot of soul searching going to have to be done from some teams that lose in the first round. Certainly would have had to be done for Winnipeg, but they advanced. They saved themselves that, or maybe just delayed it. Toronto would have had to do some soul searching if they had lost to Ottawa, but they advanced. But this one for the Kings, when you have a Vezina finalist in net against Calvin Pickard, when you have home ice advantage, when you're scoring first in, I think, every game, certainly of significance toward the end of the series, and you have almost a completely healthy roster, because now that we've seen now that the series is over, usually they announce all the injuries that everybody was playing through. I haven't heard any. I don't know if you have. You follow the team very closely. I have not heard a list of so-and-so was playing with a broken hand or anything of that nature. So a pretty healthy roster. And if it feels like, from the outside looking in, if it wasn't going to happen this year, when is it? Will it ever? And is it just the disservice, I think, for the Kings is they don't know for sure if this is a them problem or it's just a matchup problem. If they had lost to other teams, like Minnesota has lost to a variety of teams in the first round, they know it's a them problem getting past the first round. Is this just a bad matchup, or are the Kings lacking something in the locker room that keeps them from getting past that, maybe behind the bench? But they've tried different goalies. I think they've tried 4 different goalies in the 4 different series. They've tried 3 different head coaches, correct? In these 3, was it Todd McClellan for the first 2 and Hiller for the second 2? But
yes, that's correct.
Okay, so Hiller, though, in this one, and you know better than I do, he didn't seem to learn anything from last year's experience against this very team in the first round. He was behind the bench last year. He was an interim. He gets the full-time job. He comes back. To me, from the outside looking in, coaching is where you have to fix this. The roster is solid. and the players were executing the system. They did what they were asked to do, but what they were asked to do was not effective enough. And you have to believe a team that completely stops attacking in the third period of multiple games is being instructed to stop attacking in multiple games. Now, to Edmonton's credit, they came on strong, but you know they're going to come on strong. And you can't just lay back and try and counterpunch McDavid and Draisaitl and their talent, their skilled players. So try something different. He shortened the bench. That didn't work. The guys were absolutely gassed at the end of every game. To me, it's a Hiller problem, and a different coach might get you different results. But it's also the locker room has to look in introspectively and say, what are we not doing to close this out? Because we were so close and you lose 4 straight. But Edmonton, you have to give them credit. They came through when they needed to. They got the wins. They were down 2-0. They were down on home ice. They came back and won 2 battle games, and then they dominated game 5 to give themselves a chance to close it out in game 6, and they did. So you got to give them credit. But for the Kings, you have to wonder where you go from here, and it's going to be a very long summer of figuring that out and a lot of questions to be asked, starting with who's going to be our general manager. From there, who's going to be our head coach? From there, what roster moves do we make? But I thought this was the year was going to be different for the Kings. Obviously, I had them sweeping. They were my Stanley Cup pick. I just did not think this would be the year the Oilers would beat them again. I thought everything was set up for them, and just did not happen. And it's hard to believe, but yet we saw it. So you have to believe what you see it. And it's not in the NFL. One bad game can kill you. This was a best of 7 series. You got multiple opportunities to prove yourself, to learn from your mistakes, to make corrections throughout the series. So the better team won the series. You have to give them that, because it's not a mistake when you win 4 out of 6. But I just can't believe that they were the better team, that Calvin Pickard outplayed Darcy Kemper in game 6, that the Kings came out flat in game 5 on home ice. All of it was very hard to believe. And you kept thinking the other shoe's going to drop here and it's going to go the other way. And it never did.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to, there's nothing really for me to argue with anything you said. So I'm not going to really spend any more time on it than we have. If you want to hear more, you can listen to Locked On LA Kings podcast and YouTube show.
Would you bring back Hiller?
It always, when people have asked me this as a Steelers fan for a long time, because Mike Tomlin has been their head coach forever. And they've been some fans have been wanting to fire him, even though he's never had a losing season.
Right. And he's won a Super Bowl.
And he's won a Super Bowl multiple times. And my first question to them is always, okay, who are you going to get? And they never have an answer for the most part. So they don't really think it through. They just are upset because we haven't won a Super Bowl or X amount of years. So they just want to get rid of the coach. So I would say the same thing. It depends on who you're going to get. If
Peter Laviolette's available.
Yeah.
That's an upgrade.
If you can get a Stanley Cup winning coach, yes, that makes your team better. So yes, but if you're going to go out and get, the head coach of the University of Denver, then no, I don't want to get an inexperienced coach and replace a coach that's had issues with a coach who's never done it before. That's why you would make a change. So
do you think, though, the first decision obviously has to be who's making that decision?
Well, I was going to save this for the second period, but there are reports that Rob Blake and Jim Hiller are both coming back next year.
Okay, so if they're coming, well, Rob Blake does not have a contract as of now, but is still the GM. But my point is, you have to make that decision, because Peter Laviolette, there's a lot of jobs out there. He's going to take the first job available or offered to him, I would think. So if you want that guy, or if there's somebody you want, or Rick Tocchet is available, do you try and lure him? Would you be interested in him over Jim Hiller?
No, because to me, that's just kind of the same guy.
Okay.
I mean, I have to get a Stanley Cup winning coach, a guy who has definitely been through all of those situations that he might be in again, not experience it for the first time. Or if you're not going to do that, then just, I would say, bring back Jim Hiller, and hopefully he's learned his lesson, but we'll see.
Locked On LA Kings, folks.
Yeah.
Monday through Saturday, all year long.
Up next, Canadiens Capitals, the 1 seed in the East against the 8th seed. the final wildcard team, Montreal. No Sam Montembeault coming into this week because of injury. Patrick Laine also missing his third straight game due to injury as we went into game number 5. And Alexi Protas was back for the Washington Capitals for the first time as he had been injured at the end of the season. But when we last left you, first 4 games of the series were in the books. Washington won the opener 3-2. Alexander Ovechkin with the OT game winner, his first career overtime game winner in the playoffs. Game 2, Capitals win it 3-1. Logan Thompson with a good effort in that one in net, allowing 1 goal on 26 shots. Game 3, Montreal gets their first win of the series with a 6-3 victory on home ice. Scored the final 3 goals of the game to get the win. And then game 4, Washington rebounds for a 5-2 victory, setting up game number 5, a must-win for Montreal on home ice. In this one, Alexander Ovechkin would open up the scoring. Washington would add another goal and lead 2-0 after 1. Only goal of the second period came from the Capitals. In the third, Montreal would get on the board, but Washington would seal it with an empty net win, or an empty net goal, and win it 4-1 and take the series 4-1. Logan Thompson, 1 goal allowed on 29 shots in the victory. Jakub Dobeš got the start because Sam Montembeault was injured. He allowed 3 goals on 27 shots. For Alexander Ovechkin, he tied Mario Lemieux for 12th most playoff goals in NHL history with his 76th playoff goal. Capitals won a playoff series for the first time since they won the Cup in 2018, and they will face the Carolina Hurricanes in round number 2. Also, final game for Montreal veteran defenseman David Savard, who was retiring after 14 seasons.
Yeah, this one in Washington. Now, we talked about last week the fight that fell onto the bench between Tom Wilson and Josh Anderson. And we know it's an immediate suspension if you leave the bench to join a fight. But what if you take a fight onto the bench and you've got a linesman in between you? They fined them. And Tom Wilson has a thick folder in the Department of Player Safety, a long history of transgressions. I was surprised and not surprised that there was absolutely no punishment of consequence for either guy.
Did you want there to be?
When you take a fight to that extent, with the linesman involved basically the entire time, I don't know that you have to, but I wouldn't have been surprised. It's not his first offense, and this is a guy with a long history. I thought you don't get the benefit of the doubt if you're Tom Wilson at that point, and yet they did. They gave him a fine. He writes a check. He's a multimillionaire. It's not going to hurt him. So he's back in the lineup. He gets the ultimate game-winning goal, there's the third goal, but I don't know. It didn't sit well with me that they were right back out there, but it is what it is. Jakub Dobeš did all he could in net. Montreal, I think, take a huge step forward. I went back and listened to our preview of the season, and neither one of us thought they would be anywhere near the playoffs. Neither one of us thought the Ottawa Senators would be anywhere near the playoffs.
We weren't the only ones, trust me.
No, I know. I'm just saying, but for our show, I think we would both say there's teams that lose in the first round that you say that's devastating. This is, where do we go from here? And then there's teams that lose in the first round and you say, man, that was a great season. We've got a lot to build on. And I think both Ottawa and Montreal are in that position. There's no shame in losing to the best team in the Eastern Conference with the greatest goal scorer of all time. The only, they did not get swept. They won a game on home ice. They've got some good feelings. The amazing stat is, you mentioned the Kings and the Wild with their losing streak in the first round. Due to the reorganizing of the playoffs during COVID, the Montreal Canadiens have won a Western Conference playoff series more recently than the Minnesota Wild and LA Kings, because they won it in that 2021 Cup run. They were in the Western Conference. I'm like, that's ridiculous. But you forget that was not that long ago. That was 4 years ago for them making a Cup run, because they've been struggling. They made huge strides this year. Martin St. Louis has that team playing very well, complete buy-in to his system and what he's preaching. And they've got a lot to be proud about and build on. And I think them and the Senators in the East, and the Devils can look at it and be like, we weren't healthy. We weren't playing our best hockey at the end of the year. We played a very good team. We'll come back next year, hope for better health in the second half of the season. Hopefully we go from there. So the three teams that have lost that we've discussed so far in the East, I don't think can really have to hang their head too much about their loss. I think they could still feel good about their future. The three teams in the West that have lost, a little bit more devastating. Minnesota built themselves up, had a great season. I did not believe what Bill Guerin was doing, but it's been working. They had a great year. It fell apart at the end. They ended up falling into a wild card spot and getting bounced. The Kings, obviously, we think they deserve better, and the Dallas Stars or the Colorado Avalanche deserve better, but the matchups are what they are in the West. So one series left, if I'm correct, to discuss, and it's the doozy that we were all looking forward to. But three of the Eastern teams, I don't think, need to feel bad about themselves. This next one may have some questions to ask themselves going into the offseason.
Well, I was just going to add, I totally agree with you about Montreal. I think they're a young up and coming team. I think they've taken some great strides to make themselves relevant. Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield are like young veterans, right? They've been around, but they're certainly not old by any stretch. And then you've got, Uri Slafkovsky, and they add Ivan Demidov. Jakub Dobish is maybe the young upcoming goaltender as well for them.
Yeah.
Thought
and
he
then
played
Lane
pretty
Hudson.
well. Lane Hudson, of course. Yes.
My God. I mean, a future Norris Trophy candidate, as far as we can tell, the way he played this year. And Patrick Laine was a power play specialist. I don't think he's a long-term answer, but for a power play guy, you need somebody to run the power play through, and he certainly was that. So they do have a lot of nice pieces to build around. There's no doubt.
All right. The final matchup to look at was the one that I was looking the most forward to going in to this postseason. That was the Panthers against the Lightning, 2-3 matchup out of the Atlantic. When we last left you, the first 4 games have been played. And these first 4 games are a little surprising to me, as Florida won the opener in Tampa pretty easily, 6-2. Matthew Tkachuk had a couple of goals as he was back in the lineup. Game 2 goes to Florida 2-0. Sergei Bobrovsky with the 19-save shutout. Game 3, Tampa would get on the board with a 5-1 win on the road. So the road team won every game through the first 3 contests. And then Game 4, Florida gets the 4-2 win as the home team finally won a game. Seth Jones gets the game winner, and the defending Stanley Cup champs had a 3-1 lead going into a must-win Game 5 for the Lightning.
Yeah, Lightning on home ice, but as you mentioned, they hadn't won there yet. They lose their first 2 games. They win Game 3, so no home team wins through the first 3. Then Florida wins, and now all the pressure's on Tampa. But you've got all the pieces in place. So many things had gone right for Tampa this year as far as their depth, and the moves they made long ago in the offseason are paying off, getting Jake Gensel, letting Stamkos go, letting Sergachev go, having a strong core that excelled in the regular season, overachieved, I thought. I didn't think they were going to be this good, but they were. They had home ice advantage in this series. They had completely squandered it, and now it's a must-win Game 5 on home ice.
No Aaron Ekblad, by the way, for Florida in this one. He got a 2-game suspension for a forearm to the head of Tampa Bay's Brandon Hagel, and Hagel would be out of this Game 5 as well because he was injured on that play. Tampa Bay would grab a 1-0 lead in this one, but the Panthers responded with 2 goals before the Lightning would close out the opening period with a goal of their own. So 2-2 after 1. Second period, Panthers score twice. Lightning score once. It's now a 4-3 game going into the third. Then Eetu Listerainen would score to give the Cats the lead. They'd ice it with an empty net goal.
Yeah.
And 6-3 would be the final as the Florida Panthers win the series 4-1. Sergei Bobrovsky, 3 goals allowed on 29 shots in the win. In the loss, Andrei Vasilevsky, 5 goals allowed on 30 shots. The Lightning eliminated in the first round for a 3rd consecutive series. Florida has eliminated Tampa Bay from the playoffs in consecutive seasons, and the Panthers advance into the second round for a 4th straight year. Doug, I am not surprised that Florida won this series, even though I picked Tampa Bay, but I am very surprised with the ease in which they won this series.
Yeah, and look, we have to, call it as we see it. Andrei Vasilevsky was not good in this series. He ends up with an .872 save percentage. That's a guy that is a Vezina finalist, a Vezina winner in the past. And 2 of the 3 Vezina finalists were outplayed in their first round matchups.
Well, you could argue so was Connor Hellebuck.
Yeah, 100%. And he was outplayed, but he got enough wins on home ice, and his team bailed him out when they needed to with some late goals, late heroics. Absolutely. It looked like all three Vezina finalists were going to be bounced in the first round. Hellebuck advances, but Vasilevsky was not good, and it starts there. If your goalie's going to get outplayed, makes it very tough. Your offense has to come through, and the star players for Tampa simply did not come through enough. No goals for Nikita Kucherov in this series. Jake Gensel had a great series, 3 goals and 6 assists, can't do much more, but there's absolutely no depth behind that. The only other players that had more than one goal, Braden Point, with no assists, by the way, 2 goals and no assists. That was it. And then Nick Paul, you got to get more offense from your lineup, your star players. You're expecting more from star players, and they simply did not come through in this. And look, you can give credit. The Panthers won the Stanley Cup last year and have one of the best head coaches behind their bench in Paul Maurice. But the Lightning have won Stanley Cups as well and have a great head coach behind their bench in John Cooper. So everything was there for Tampa. I think they're kind of in that similar situation with the Kings in Avalanche. And where do we go from here? What do we need to do? Because we have veterans in position that are having great regular seasons and great success. Nikita Kucherov was one of the best players in the league all season. And yet in the playoffs, he has no goals in 5 games. Where do we go? What can we possibly add within our salary cap with a veteran team that has a great goalie on paper, a great defenseman on paper, great forwards on paper, but are not getting the job done? You mentioned 3 straight first-round losses. Where do you go if you're Colorado, LA, and Tampa? It's a big question for them this offseason. I don't think any of the 3 need to do anything drastic, and yet you can't just run it back and expect different results. You have to make tweaks. It's where do you make those tweaks, and that's where the GMs are going to earn their money. It's easy to build and it's easy to tear down, but what are the pieces that are going to get you over the top? That's where GMs really earn their money, and I think all 3 organizations need to look now and figure out where they go from here, and it's going to be tough. It's going to be a long off season that starts way too early.
All right, so that was our look at the conclusion of the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. If you want to hear our thoughts on round number 2, you'll have to check out the podcast. But that's going to do it for our first period of the YouTube show.
Well, let me ask you real quick before you sign off here, Eddie. How's your bracket doing? Because my 2 Stanley Cup finalists are the only 2 teams that were upset in the first round, Tampa and LA. Those are the 2 teams that lost to a lower seed, as it were. Every other high seed won. So my Stanley Cup final is gone, and
so is mine.
Yeah?
Yeah, I had Tampa Bay versus Colorado.
There you go. So
we know nothing.
Yeah, and back in the early season, I said it was going to be Dallas and the Rangers, and the Rangers didn't even make the playoffs. I thought the Kings, that was my third. I thought the Avalanche were my second pick, the second most confident, and the Kings were my third most confident, and both of them got bounced. So, yeah, I've been very surprised by the results so far. That said, we're going to preview the second round here in the next one. So if you want to know what's going to happen, listen to us and wait for the opposite to happen.
But that'll do it for the first period of the YouTube show. If you enjoyed what you have been listening to and watching, you should check out the second period and the third period of our podcast. Just search Puck Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening to the podcast already, the second and third periods are coming right up. If you are watching on YouTube, I'm Eddie Garcia. He's Doug Stolhand, and we'll talk to you next week with another edition of the Puck Podcast.